Hi everyone, in this video you'll watch me paint a cherry blossom. And as you watch me develop the watercolor painting, I'll provide you with detailed instructions for every step in the process. For a discussion on the paintbrushes, paper, paints, and miscellaneous tools that I use when painting, see my video entitled Tools and Materials Used for Transparent Watercolor Painting. Before I begin to wash in paint to the surface of the paper, I always analyze the subject very carefully to see if there is anything that I need to consider before I actually apply the paint. And there is. The anther and the filaments are very delicate structures that overlap or come into the foreground in front of the background petals. The best course of action would be to paint these areas first and then mask them out to protect them from the washes that I need to apply in order to establish the petals themselves. My watercolor paper is stretched, and I'm ready to start painting. I'll begin with aureole yellow. Into the aureole yellow, I'm going to apply just a small amount of cobalt blue. I want the cobalt blue to be mixed with the aureole yellow and create a very subtle hint of green. I dampen the area to be painted with clean water, and I apply the paint that I just mixed. Into that, I'm going to apply some more clean water. I flow clean water into the newly applied paint. This pushes the pigment to the perimeter of the wet area and smooths the transition from light to dark. I'll continue to develop the filaments in this fashion and allow them to dry. Then I'll paint in the anthers. Now that the filaments are dry, I'm going to paint in the color of the anthers, and I'll use aureole yellow for the yellow. It's very close to what I see in the photo. There's the aureole yellow right there. See how close it is? Now, the anthers are interesting little things. They're divided in half. And as they move into the shadow takes on a slight greenish tint. So I mixed a little of my cobalt blue with that. I'm going to put it into the anther at its midpoint. Some plain water. Actually, in some of the anthers I see a little hint of yellow ochre, so I'd like to add a bit of that. There we go. And some plain water. Okay, I'm going to continue to develop the anthers in this fashion, using the aureole yellow. But before I turn off the camera and continue to work on this off camera, and we'll come back to it when I'm finished all of this detail work, I'd like to show you how to create a brown just using your primary colors. Starting with a little of my aureole yellow. Now I'm going to go to some French ultramarine blue and mix that into aureole yellow. Notice I have a wonderful green here. How do I modulate that to brown? Next color is Windsor red. I'm adding the Windsor red to the mixture of aureole yellow and French ultramarine blue. See how the addition of Windsor red turned the green brown. Now, I want to modulate it to a golden ochre. I continue to adjust the color with yellow until I get my desired result. Look at the beautiful raw sienna that we have now. Limiting yourself to the primaries and mixing results in these wonderful color families where all the colors work harmoniously together. Beautiful. Okay. Now I have a nice brown that I could use for other areas of this. And I'll take my mixed sienna color and add it there. I've continued to lay in the anthers and the filaments. And before I paint in the background petals, the petals that these overlap, I'll need to mask all of this out. Because nothing is overlapping these petals, there is no need to mask anything. If we study this petal carefully, you'll see that it's essentially variations on white and gray. Painting white can be a challenge. The white will be the white of the paper. Referring to my photo, I'm going to continue to mix into this color in an effort to create a nice gray that I can use in the area that I just pointed out. Add in French ultramarine blue to the mixed brown will modulate the brown towards a gray. And I'll begin to work in my mixed grays. What I should do at this stage is allow what I have to bleed and to dry. While this area is drying, I'm going to move up to this bud that I see in the background. The bud actually has a lot of greenish gray in it. So I'm mixing a little of the aureolin yellow and the ultramarine blue with some of my gray that you've been watching me mix. Good, I got the kind of green gray that I want. I'll work it into the dampened area. Down there, down there. Pull a little water into that so it blends nicely. And now a more basic gray tonality on this end. And I see a very pale indication of cerulean blue right there. I'll add it. And a little bit over here would be good. The white of the bud has a hint of blue in it. Into that, I'm going to flow the mixed gray with a hint of green. A little cerulean blue. I see a little cobalt blue there. When I say I use the primaries, that doesn't mean I just use one red, one yellow, and one blue. For my blues, I have many blues. Ultramarine, cerulean, phthalocyanine, believe it or not, cobalt blue, Antwerp blue. Those are my blue primaries. And I'm going back into my mixed gray. And I'm dropping down to the green gray because I see a need to use that. And I'll apply it down here and let it bleed up. The process is to paint wet into wet. Also, I notice it darkens a bit down there, so why not get that gray-green tone into that area. Dampen it. Now, this has some beautiful colors going on, very subtle. I see a little bit of cerulean blue and quinacridone red rose. I can't possibly mix that color. It's one of those reds, you got to use it out of the tube. So, what I'll do first is wash in the cerulean blue. This is a very light area of the petal. So I'm going to wash in the cerulean blue. Then I'm going to apply the subtlest hint of the quinacridone rose. And I see it essentially in this area, right over here. Beautiful color. Now that this part of the petal is dry, I'm going to introduce the shadow. And how do I do that? I dampen it. And I'll flow in my gray. And allow the gray to bleed up. See a little bit of a shadow area here. Leave it alone. Some cerulean blue. And then into the cerulean blue, I will add a little quinacridone red, and I'll flow it in. Move it around with some plain water. Start off with cerulean. Strong hint of green right down here. We'll go to my mixed green. Nice variation. Actually, I gotta pick up a little of that green right about there. I will. Good. Let it bleed into the pink. Originally, I had laid in the grays to indicate some of the transitions from light to dark that occurred on this petal. I'm going to dampen it again because I also see in that petal some cerulean blue that I didn't originally add. Now that it's dampened, I can apply the cerulean, and the blue continues up here. Nice. See, with watercolor, you can let it dry after you apply washes of color. Then when it's completely dry, you can introduce new washes and gradually build the surface in terms of layers of washes. As I develop a watercolor, I often rework the drawing to add things that I might have left out in my original drawing. And that's what I look for when I'm painting something that's white. I look for all the little ambient reflections and glistenings of color in the white. So white is not just white. It's rich with other nuances that enhance its beauty. Right now I'm working only on the white petals, and I'm introducing subtle hints of color to create variations on white. I find cerulean blue to be the best blue for that. I'm going to go directly to a very light tint of aureolin yellow for that area. These buds have very significant shadows underneath. My approach will be to lay in the petals that form the buds with the lighter values first. Then after that's dry, I'll work in heavier or darker shadow areas. First wash of color is my cerulean blue. Into that, I'm going to work a little aureolin yellow and quinacridone red. I see all those subtle ambient colors throughout that shape. I see a lot of golden tones down there. But once I lay in the background, I think that will establish a dominant feeling that they are white petals. Very light tint of cerulean. And just work it. Flowing little color. Now the petal folds up a little in this area, and it's grayed. I'm going to dampen that folded area and work in the gray to establish the fold in the petal. Let's break the pace for a while and develop some of the green. Get away from the white. What is interesting about these forms is the fact that they're green, but they have red rims, and I have a very definite way to achieve that. For the red rim that I just pointed out, I'm going to use brown matter. Need to wet some of the brown matter. And for the green of the bud, I'm gonna use French ultramarine blue and aureolin yellow. I always start with the yellow. So let's squeeze in some of that aureolin yellow. And I'll add a touch of my ultramarine blue. I add the blue in small increments because I could quickly overpower the yellow and make it a very blue-green, and then that would require mixing more yellow into it, and I'd wind up with a huge amount of color, mixed color, that I really don't want. I want a smaller amount. Look at that green. That's a beautiful, natural green. For the bud, we're going to use 2 colors right now, maybe even 3. We're going to use our green. I'll probably wind up applying some additional aureolin into the bud area, and I'm going to begin, believe it or not, with a foundation color, a brown matter. So let's do it. The objective here is to achieve a rim of brown matter along the perimeter of this form, with very subtle hints of the brown matter coming through, but predominantly a green shape. So how do I do it? Dampen it. Now I'm going to flow in my brown matter so I said I want to have a green bud at the base. Why am I painting this in as a strong brown? Brownish red, actually. Well, this is how I achieve the perimeter color. First thing is I apply that color like that. Then I take my mixed green and begin to flow in the mixed green. The green flows on top of the brown and pushes much of the brown to the perimeter of the wet area. And I lift out using a dampened, clean paintbrush. There, it's like a vacuum cleaner. Sucks it right up. Continue to flow in more of the green. And lift it out. Good. See how the brown is being pushed to the edge? It's wonderful. And it's very natural looking. Now I go back into my green. Time to get in a little bit of my aureolin yellow into that area. And I'm going to carry that down here. Wet it. Flow in. Ooh, a lot of paint for a tiny area. Flow in the brown matter. Because I applied an excessive amount of brown matter to this area, I'll lift out some brown matter before I flow in the green. Now I'm flowing in the green. And I'm lifting some out. This process results in very rich colors. I retain hints of the brown poking through the green, and the effect is extremely naturalistic. Now that this area is completely dry, I'm going to continue to add a little bit more of the detail, and I see there's a distinction between up here and down here. I'm going to achieve that by washing in a little bit of cobalt blue to darken this area a bit. My cobalt blue. I start to work it in. And I work it in such a way that I don't cover the whole area. I leave passages of light and dark, trying to suggest the detail that I see on the surface. And I'm applying the cobalt blue to darken the green. Brown matter. I'm going to go a little lighter with the brown matter this time. Because this leaf blends into the filaments, before I mask out the filaments, I'm going to paint this dark green area in. First thing I'm going to do is dampen the filaments as they merge into the green area. Continuing to use my mixture of ultramarine blue and aureolin yellow, I'll apply it to this area. And to that area, I'm going to add a little bit of Winsor yellow right over here. Before I continue with the development of the petals and the buds and the stem, I think it's time to lay in the masking. The brand I use is Pabio drawing gum. I don't like to stick my brush in there and then apply it. I like to keep that closed. So I dispense quantity of it into one of these little dispensing bottles, and I have a piece of wire stuck in the thin needle to act as a cork to prevent it from drying out and clogging. This enables me to apply a small amount at a time. Masking material inevitably ruins whatever brush you use, but I find either with soapy water or a little bit of ammonia and water helps prevent a buildup of the drawing gum on the brush. I also always have a tissue available. I don't want to put ammonia on my hand. I like to usually dispense a little of the masking material on a surface. Paper's fine. And I don't apply it thinly. I flow it on. I find that is the most effective way to work with this material. Brushing masking fluid is not an effective way to apply it. It's better to flow it. See what I mean by flowing it? I'm literally moving a bead of masking material over the surface. There are a few things you need to strictly adhere to when using masking fluid. Number one, only apply it to areas that are 100% dry. Never apply it to a damp area or a dampened section of the paper. The material will get into the fiber of the paper and never come off. Number two, do not attempt to speed up the drying process by putting it in the sun. The ultraviolet rays of the sun will degrade the material and it'll become a gummy mess impossible to remove from the paper. Number three, do not attempt to speed up the drying using a hairdryer. That can also damage the masking material and make it gummy. You want to allow it to air dry on its own. And the fourth thing, don't start painting the area until the masking material is completely dry. Very useful stuff if it's used properly. A disaster if you don't pay attention to those things that I've pointed out. I'm going to allow it to dry before I do anything else to that area. What I do with the needle that was on the dispenser jars, I'll take it and I'll throw it into the ammonia in the water. This way it dissolves any of the masking fluid that's in that needle. And cover it with a clogged needle so it's air sealed and doesn't start to dry out inside the jar. Good. While the masking fluid is drying, I'm going to go over to another section of my studio and continue working on a full sheet watercolor. The one that you see is of apple blossoms, and it's a 22 by 30 inch watercolor. Pabio drawing gum goes on milky gray and opaque, but when it's dry, it's clear. You can see through it, so that's another indication that it's dry. The beauty of the masking material is I can now comfortably lay in the washes for the background petals without worrying about the anthers and the filaments. They're protected. The first thing that I'll do is dampen the area. Look at that. That's a beautiful property of watercolor. Those dots will not absorb into the paper. They will evaporate, stay exactly where they are. That's a wonderful property of watercolor paper, good watercolor paper. The area that you dampen is the only area that will be wet. Anything immediately adjacent to that area remains dry. That allows you to modulate your tones and work with your colors in a very specific area without ever worrying about it bleeding into the adjacent area. I'm applying my mixture in this one of cerulean blue and quinacridone rose to capture the more violet that I see in this particular petal. The first washes of color are dry. Now I can start to work in the detail. So what I do is I dampen the petal again. This allows me, the dampening of the petal permits me to work in colors that blend. Using my mixed gray, and I'll paint in areas that I see are in the shadow. That curves over. As the petal moves towards the center, it picks up a little bit more violet down there and a little bit of cobalt blue there. First, I'll work in the blue. I let it bleed. Then I'll work in some of that violet color. Very subtle. You have reached the end of part 1. See part 2 of How to Paint the Cherry Blossom in Watercolor by Ross Barbera for the continuation and conclusion of this watercolor painting demonstration.